If you look at the books I read in the last 3 months, this is exactly my taste. Gothic, fantasy romance with very atmospheric settings, unique magic systems, and whimsical storylines. And some unique reads in between. Honestly, I'm proud of myself because I managed to read 5 books from my actual autumn TBR, which, let me tell you, doesn't happen very often. I set the bar super high with the first read of September, which was River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. I picked up the famous Divine Rivals in July. It was an instant 5-star read, and ever since I've been trying to discover more of Rebecca Ross's work. In August, I read Dreams Lie Beneath, a standalone fantasy from her that scratched an itch, but it just wasn't on the same level as Divine Rivals. In September though, I gravitated toward River Enchanted, which has a very beautiful cover with the swirling waves and the purple flowers decorating it. It is also full of Rebecca Ross's lyrical descriptions. The story itself, I would say, is very sound focused, like there is a lot about the wind whispering, and one of the main characters is a bard, so it makes sense. The world building is absolutely stunning, with elemental spirits and fairy tale and folklore inspired details. We follow 2 couples that belong to the same tribe that's living on this enchanted sort of Scotland inspired island named Cadence. Their stories run parallel and the book switches between them, but they all deal with very different emotions and struggles that are still somehow interconnected. How to phrase this in a way that would want to make you pick up the book, but not spoil it? I would say Jack and Adaira's story is about coming home. It is about duty, building trust, and finding belonging. While on the other hand, Thorin and Sidra's tale focuses more on how it feels when your core beliefs are being challenged, feeling powerful versus feeling powerless all of a sudden, and their story is more about loyalty and quiet but unwavering love. There is so much healing in this book. It is absolutely beautiful. When I read a romance book, I tend to focus on the romantic relationships, but in this book, every relationship was depicted with fascinating depth. Brother and sister, cousins, father and daughter, adoptive mother and daughter, they were all there. It was emotional, but the end of this book gave some closure. Nevertheless, I'm super excited for the second part, which is titled A Fire Endless. Not in a sense that there were a lot of questions left unanswered after A River Enchanted, but more in a sense of curiosity where the character's journey is going after receiving some answers. If your thing is childhood enemies to lovers in an enchanted fantasy setting, or if you liked Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies and or Divine Rivals, this is your book. At this point, I consider it my specialty to jump from one genre to something completely different. So after A River Enchanted, it was time for the famous or infamous Bunny by Mona Avad. It was our local book club read for autumn, so that gave me a bit of extra motivation to finish it fast. The words I used in my notes to describe the story were ominous, unsettling, and disorienting, and I stand by them. It is labeled as horror or thriller, and I had a lot of moments where I was left thinking, what am I reading? This can work well for some people, but if you do not prefer the experience of blurred lines between reality and imagination, it might not work well for you. On the surface, Bunny is a story about Samantha, who is part of an elite writing cohort, yet struggles with being an outsider at the university as a scholarship student. It is dark academia in the dark and twisted sense, and also because it contains critique of the ways of the upper class society and academia from Samantha's point of view. She seems detached from her fellow students until she gets an invitation to some after-school activities by the Bunnies, who are this clique of rich girls who resemble dolls and are unbearably like fake sweet to each other. Not gonna lie, that part was a bit hard to read, like how the Bunnies talked and behaved. On a deeper level though, Bunny speaks about female loneliness, the desire to belong, creative inspiration and also creative blocks, wrapped up in an unsettling and dark atmosphere. It is very different from the books I usually read, so I'm glad I gave it a try because it was a unique experience and I would recommend it to everyone seeking something similar. After the unhinged reading experience that was Bunny, again I was missing the fantasy romance vibes and I needed something a bit more familiar, so I chose One Dark Window as my next read. I took a note. I'm only 5 pages in, but the autumn vibes are immaculate. It was just the right amount of eerie, misty, featuring castles and forests that I needed at the moment. Bonus points for the nightmare to talk in rhymes and give ominous foreshadowing also in rhymes. I feel like that elevated the whole experience for me. The magic system in the book is built on the so-called Providence cards, with each of them granting a special ability to the people who come in contact with them, but they also pay a price for it. As the main character, we have Elspeth, who touched a nightmare card as a child, and now an ancient spirit is trapped in her head, granting her the ability to see the card's auras, even if they are concealed, which comes in handy when she meets a group of mysterious highwaymen who are plotting treason by collecting the whole Providence deck. Let's take a second to talk about Raven as a love interest, because honestly, it was refreshing to read an actual main character that is not just tall, buff and broody with zero personality. He is the captain of the guards, mysterious and clever, and his and Elspeth romance has a little bit of historical fiction feel to it, like it begins with the brushing of their hands, and I ate that up, thank you. This book is exactly to my taste, just the right amount of mystery, fantasy, unique magic system, sweet romance, and good plot pacing. Definitely one of the highlight reads of the year for me. The second part, Two Twisted Crowns, just came out recently, and I'm fully planning to pick it up in the upcoming months to finish the series. And the sun has appeared, yay! Another book from my autumn TBR, and this one I even have the physical copy of. Next I read The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. Despite owning the first part of the Gilded Wolf series, this is the first book I read from her, but I knew before that the author tends to rely on vibes and the intricacies of relationships in her works, which, to be honest, suited me just fine. This book is haunting and beautiful. Don't let the cover fool you into thinking this is some folklorish, fae fantasy story. It is set in modern times and tells the tale of Indigo, a flower bride, through the eyes of her husband, which was a nice storytelling twist in my opinion. Despite the husband being the narrator, the main focus is on Indigo and her childhood best friend Azure, and how the husband uncovers the details of their childhood and their obsession with each other. Honestly, I enjoyed the structure of the book a lot, how we get the husband's POV in the current day, and he notices something which later gets explained when we switch to Indigo and Azure's POV of the past. It was a little bit like playing a mystery game, trying to catch the clues that will get revealed later on in the story. At first, I didn't realize that it is set in modern times, but they mention things like DJs and the Chronicles of Narnia, but the whole story is very atmospheric. Indigo and the husband often talk through mythological characters and storylines, so it kind of adds this otherworldly feel to it. The story deals with themes of obsession, loneliness, manipulation in various relationships, and it has such a captivating way of spinning the tale. I would definitely recommend it if you're seeking an atmospheric read centered on human relationships with some mystery and a magical, mystical house of dreams. Continuing with the theme of books that are heavy on the atmospheric part and low on the plot complexity, I turned to The Night Circus next. I read this book in a week and it felt like a dream somehow. Like, I can recall the feeling the book gave me, but not necessarily particular plot points or things that happened in the story exactly. Am I the only one who feels like this after reading it? Please let me know in the comments below if you have read it. It is even hard for me to describe the plot, but here's my attempt. The Night Circus is centered around, obviously, a magical circus, and we get a glimpse into multiple people's lives that are connected to it. The two most prominent ones are Celia and Marco, two magicians who have been trained to duel each other in a game that is never really described, just in the vaguest terms, but they end up tumbling headfirst into love, as the blurb puts it. The devastating but beautiful story unfolds like a dream, with intricate and artfully described settings, interconnected destinies, blending fantasy, romance, and mystery in a way that has captivated me from the beginning to the end, basically. It is truly a unique reading experience. I would say a must-read for anyone seeking a spellbinding, magical world. I knew that my September reading month was so fantastic, with all these magical, mystical books, that this streak had to end at some point with a disappointing read. And it happened to me with A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. Hear me out. I was prepared to love this book. I expected a refreshing twist on the typical magical school trope, with the main character Elle being witty and ruthless as she struggles for power in a dark and intriguing setting. Instead, I got a plot-focused info dump on how dangerous the school is and very little character depth or actual plot in my opinion, apart from everyone trying to survive in the school. I very nearly DNF'd it halfway through. My notes were full of comments like, yeah, the first 80-ish pages are just stage setting, nothing really changes, alliances don't shift. And it is hard to get into, page 116, and it's just so long. I did not care for Orion and Elle's dynamic, with him doing kind things for her, and Elle being nothing but rude. Some readers describe Elle's tone of voice as sarcastic, with a brooding sense of petulance, but I found it a tad bit irritating after a while, I have to tell you. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but that is the case. I finished the book only to see if anything changed by the end, but I was not impressed, so I definitely won't be continuing the series. The only redeeming character development point, if I can call it that, was how Elle viewed the power imbalance detailed between people who belong to influential groups and people who do not. This, in my opinion, earned the book the Dark Academia Adjacent label, but it wasn't enough to captivate my interest, unfortunately. If you are looking for a plot-heavy story about a magical school where everyone just constantly tries to survive, this might work for you, but otherwise, this is an entirely skippable book and you won't be missing out on much experience. I struggled to finish A Deadly Education when in reality I could have DNF'd it halfway through when I lost interest, but a book that I actually DNF'd in October was Forget Me Not. This book was recommended by all the booktokers I watch whose tastes match mine. I've seen the hype for it. It is a second chance romance with the male main character being a grumpy florist. We get both POVs in the story, all pointing in the direction of me liking this book, but that was just not the case. I DNF'd it at 61% because I wasn't invested or interested at all to see how it plays out. The main character, Ama's personality consists of being a girl boss wedding organizer, which is fine, loving donuts, and having a mom who has married like 12 times. Oh, and not bringing her car for regular checkups. Like, I was so bored of her, not gonna lie. I also don't like the trope when the character is simply like, oh, I don't do relationships, but it's not explored why. Bad breakup? Fine. Disillusioned by love? Fine. But when it's just that without explanation, not my thing. Maybe it is explored after the 60% part, but I just couldn't get myself to continue. Their tension was not tensioning, their chemistry was not chemistrying, and I was getting annoyed at that celebrity wedding woman, so I put this book down. I should know that unless a contemporary romance book is written by Talia Hibbert, I will have a hard time liking it. At least so far, that's what the sample size shows. The only funny thing is, the main character had to organize a wedding that's on the 7th of October, and I actually attended my friend's wedding on the 7th of October this year, so that little coincidence made me smile. To cure myself of the DNF curse, for my next read I turned to something lighthearted and witchy, namely The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This is a little fluffy, cheesy, feel-good book which came at the right time, but now looking back in December, my brain retained shockingly little of what happened in the story actually. In The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, we have Micah Moon, who needs to hide her magic, but gets an invitation to teach 3 young witches at the mysterious Nowhere House. There are themes of isolation, being unlovable, and building trust, and at the core of it, it is a heartwarming story about a found family. Like, they literally spell out the found family part. You don't even have to think about it. There is also romance, of course, between Micah and the prickly librarian of the house, Jamie, as they grow closer and learn to trust each other. The book reminded me a little bit of Act Your Age, Evie Brown from Talia Hibbert, which is one of my favorites, at least when it comes to the romance dynamic, so that's definitely a bonus point. To be honest, I liked the first part of the book much more than the second half. I felt like the story kind of fell flat after a while. I did not care about the conflict and the resolution all that much. But if you are looking for a sweet tale of witchy found families, a little bit of grumpy and sunshine romance, this book promises a good time because it's full of those tropes. If I recall correctly, they also celebrate the holidays in it at some point, so it can work as a festive read as well. From the light-hearted, cozy witchy stories, I went for another eerie, gothic fantasy with a study in drowning. I made a whole reading vlog about it, so I won't go into much detail here. You can check it out if you're interested. I try to keep it spoiler-free. The atmospheric setting in this book reminded me a lot of a far wilder magic, with the folklore vibes, dark colors, lots of damps and descriptions, and overall the imagery Ava Reid used was very much centered around water and the devastation caused by water. The cover might make you think, oh, this is like a cozy dark academia read, but don't let it fool you. The book gives off more of an uneasy feeling, and heavy themes are touched upon in it, such as mental health issues as a young woman, misogyny, and the loss of agency as a woman. On the surface, it is a story about Effie, a first-year architecture student who ends up being tasked with redesigning her favorite author's old house, who recently passed away, and finds herself working together with her academic rival Preston to unravel the mysteries surrounding the house and the author himself. On a deeper level, it is about how women learn to survive when the circumstances force them to, prejudice toward opposing beliefs, and the relationship between a written work and the reader, and how it can be unique for everyone. And finally, it is about finding strength in not being fearless. I feel like the book is cheapened a bit with academic rivals to lovers and dark academia labels, because those were not exactly the strongest points of the story in my opinion. So rather, I would recommend it to someone seeking a deeper exploration of the topics I just mentioned, rather than just picking it up for the romance plotline, which was a bit meh in my opinion. To finish off the autumn months, I picked up my most anticipated read of the year, A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. It is also part of the reading vlog I made, so make sure to check it out to hear me ramble about it. To briefly summarize it, it wasn't a 5-star book for me, which was shocking as I rated the first and second part, both 5 stars in the series, but I still had a good time, mainly because of the Eva-Jax dynamic. This book has a lot of scenes for the romance girlies like myself, which might not make a lot of sense plot-wise, but I was eating it up like I expected. Unfortunately, it also has Apollo's POV, and I just did not care for him as a character, so it was a bit difficult to get through those parts. Again, this story gives off dark fairy tale vibes, and it's definitely heavier on the atmospheric setting and the personal relationships part, rather than a complex plotline. However, I felt like this book was missing a bit of the magic I fell in love with in the first and second parts, like the perfect balance of sweet romance and devastation was just not there in my opinion. It reads less like the last part of a series and more of a build-up, other than basically the last 20% when everything happens and the story ends. Overall, I think my expectations were a bit too high, as I was thinking this is going to be my new favorite book of all times, but it was still a good time and a satisfying conclusion to the series. And then I went on a trip and I haven't finished any books from the trip TBR I filmed previously. Great, right? Sometimes you make plans, but they turn out differently, and that's okay. I'm currently reading The Secret History, Iron Flame, and The Fake Boyfriend Fiasco from Talia Hibbert, so you can look forward to them in the next reading wrap-up. I hope you had a fun time with me rambling about all of these books. See you in my next video. Until then, take care. Bye!